Hi, my name is Kearney and I'm the Director of Development with Autism NI. Autism NI is Northern Ireland's main autism charity, and we exist to support autistic people and their families and campaign to raise autism acceptance within society. So Autism NI have joined with the Southern GP Federation to create a series of 2 videos on autism, anxiety and self-care. So this is the second video in that series, and this is really going to focus on how we can understand how anxiety impacts us on a day-to-day basis, and then think about those self-care and well-being strategies that can really promote positive self-esteem, positive mood and positive well-being. The first thing I'd like to say is that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. So with anxiety management, everybody will have a different way of experiencing anxiety, different things that cause them anxiety on a day-to-day basis, and different strategies that help them to manage that. So this video is really about giving you a starting point to explore some of those strategies, so that you can hopefully find the strategies that work best for you. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is what actually happens in your brain when you become anxious. So if you imagine there are 2 different parts of your brain. We have an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. The upstairs brain is responsible for rational thinking and for problem solving, whereas the downstairs brain is responsible for those instant reactions about keeping safe and those emotional responses that you have instantly. And if you get stressed or anxious, what can happen is that it's nearly as if somebody has put a stairgate on your brain, and actually only the downstairs brain is able to work. So the downstairs brain is doing a lot of instant reactions and emotional response, and it's much harder for you to be able to problem solve and rationalize. And if you've ever experienced this when you're really anxious and you feel that you aren't able to think rationally or you aren't able to problem solve in the same way, that could be why. And that's why it's important as much as possible to understand what causes us anxiety, so that we can try and reduce and mitigate that, so that actually we don't get to the point where our downstairs brain is making all of the decisions, and that we can really help ourselves to think rationally and problem solve and support our well-being. So how do we do that? How do we support our well-being and understand those things? Well, actually, when we think about anxiety, a lot of the times what's happening is there's a gap between the demands that are being placed on you and the skills and capacity that you have to be able to manage those things. And this is why 2 people could both have a really busy day, and one person seems to be coping with that and the other person is really struggling and is in burnout or exhausted. It's not because one person can do it much better than the other, it's because actually there's a difference between their demands and capacity. So for person 1, who seems to be coping quite well, even though they're having a busy day and there's quite a lot of demands on them, they still have the skills and capacity to be able to manage that and deal with that. Whereas for person 2, the demands that are being placed on them are outstripping their ability and the skills and the capacity that they have to deal with that. And that might be for a number of reasons. It might be that actually for person 2, they have all of the demands of that busy day, but they also are experiencing a bereavement. So there's more demands on them. So their demands are bigger. Or it could be that actually on that day, their skills and capacity have decreased. So maybe they are feeling sick, maybe they have headache, maybe they have only had 2 or 3 hours sleep, and therefore their skills and capacity is much lower. So you've got this gap that has been created between the demand and skills for that second person, and that's why they're experiencing much more anxiety and stress. And it's important to recognise that your skills and capacity can change from a day-to-day basis because of external factors or because of different things that are happening for you. So it's important for you to be responsive to what's happening in your life at that point. And hopefully thinking about that gap between demand and skills can help you to be really proactive, to think, well, if I am really struggling in this environment, how can I either decrease demands or increase skills and capacity? And there's a couple of other analogies or I suppose thoughts around this gap between your demand and skills that can be really helpful for you to think about. The 2 that I'm going to cover today are the spoon theory and then energy accounting. So for spoon theory, if you imagine that everybody has a certain amount of spoons in a day, and spoons are basically the energy or the capacity and skills that you have. So everybody wakes up and has a certain number of spoons. But the important thing to recognise is that not everybody uses spoons in the same way. And for some autistic people, you may be having to use more spoons in everyday activities than a neurotypical person. So for example, getting up in the morning, having a shower, getting dressed and getting your breakfast. If you have lots of sensory processing differences around food, around clothing, around textures and around personal hygiene and showering, that can mean that actually you've used 5 spoons up before you leave the house, whereas for a neurotypical person who isn't dealing with those differences, they've only used 1 or 2. And that can mean that you may be more prone to running out of spoons or having that anxiety or stress because of that gap between your demand and skills. And that's why it's important for you to think about actually how many spoons do you have in a day and what takes up and uses your spoons. So this sort of analogy or this sort of idea, you can think about your day or your week and think about what might actually cause you to use spoons up. And that can help you to plan for your day and implement those times where you need rest or relaxation to be able to manage. So for example, if you have a job interview coming up at the end of the week, you know that you might need more spoons for that. So you might have to actually reserve some spoons from the day before or borrow some spoons from the day after. And if you're doing that, that's okay, as long as you're planning for that. So the day before or the day after, you might need to implement more rest, more relaxation, more self-care to be able to manage that, to avoid that burnout and exhaustion. And a similar theory is energy accounting. So instead of talking about spoons within energy accounting, we talk about a bank account. So if you imagine with a bank account, you have deposits and then you have withdrawals. And it's similar for an energy account. So you have things that deposit energy and things that withdraw energy. So deposits are things that give us energy, skills and capacity. So it's anything that makes us feel good and that helps us to cope. So that could be a range of different self-care activities, it could be relaxation, taking breaks, it could be different activities that you like to engage in. And then withdrawals are things that use up your energy. So that could be anything throughout your day or your week that mean that you have to use energy and use skills to be able to manage that. And you could use a table like the one shown here to start to create an account and look at your energy withdrawals and your deposits. And the whole point of this is about balancing the in and out categories. So if you recognize that there's a day or a week where there's lots and lots more deposit or lots and lots more withdrawals, you can then deposit more in on that week to be able to balance the books. And whatever of those strategies you use to start to really understand how anxiety works for you, they can be really helpful in planning your day, in monitoring and dealing with expectations on you, and most importantly, in helping you to avoid burnout, avoid exhaustion, and promote that real positive well-being. So what we've talked about so far in video 1 and in the start of this video is very much about how we can decrease demands, how we can understand more about the demands that are being placed on us. But what I want to finish now with is actually how do we get those deposits? How do we build skills and capacity and prioritise self-care so that you are better able to manage and cope and feel positive? So the last analogy that I want to use here is something called an emotional toolbox. You might have come across this before when you're thinking about anxiety. So an emotional toolbox is a toolbox full of different tools or activities that you can use that promote positive well-being and positive mood. And you can see here there are lots and lots of different options that you can use. So fast working tools, they can be things like exercise, like stimming, anything that gives you feedback in your body to be able to get that quick release. Then we've got slow release tools, and those are things like mindfulness, deep breathing, grounding exercises, positive self-talk, anything that slowly helps you to feel more positive and more grounded. Then we have social tools, so for some people, they use things like talking to other people or even talking to and engaging with a pet to help them to feel more comfortable. Or it could be journaling and writing down your thoughts or your worries to help you to process those. And then finally, we have interests. So any interests, hobbies, activities that you do that bring you joy and positivity are going to really counteract those more difficult periods in your life. And you can see here in this image, there are lots and lots of different ideas and lots of different choices. The big thing that I would always say about an emotional toolbox is it's much better to have a toolbox that is effective and efficient, even if there's only 1 or 2 tools in there, rather than having a toolbox full of absolutely everything possible, but you struggle to use some of those tools because either there's too many choices or you just don't actually really know how to use them that effectively, or they don't work that well for you. What I really mean by that is have a look at the slide, and if there are example tools or strategies that you think might not work well for you, you don't have to use them. It's much better to just pick even one or two that you think will work really well for you and utilize those to help you to manage. So for example, journaling might not be a great strategy for you if, for example, you're dyslexic or if you just don't like writing. It's not going to give you any positivity. It's not going to help you to manage those stressful periods. So it's not a strategy that you need to necessarily put in your toolbox. The other thing that you can think about with lots of these examples is how can you adapt the approach to make more sense for your processing. So for example, deep breathing can be a really great tool to physiologically calm your breathing down and slow your heart rate. But if somebody is verbally telling you and explaining to you how to take deep breaths and you're already overloaded and stressed, that's not necessarily going to be the best way to use that strategy for you, especially if you're a visual thinker and if you're very concrete. A better way to adapt this approach would be using something like on the slide here. So a little visual, like a sniff the strawberry visual, that's concrete and that you can use on your own as and when you need to be able to help you to engage in that deep breathing. And you can personalize it even further by swapping out the strawberry for your favorite smell or for something that is comforting to you. And you can tailor the approach for a lot of these different strategies to work well for your processing and to work towards your own strengths. So things like mindfulness, grounding activities, muscle relaxation can all be tailored to work for you. And Autism NI have lots of different example resources and visuals on the resources section of our website. So please do have a look if you think that you'd like to adapt or tailor the approach based on your needs. So there's lots and lots that we've talked about there in terms of lots of different ideas and strategies to support you. The last thing I'd say within that section is try not to compare yourself to other people. Be individualized. Because actually what works for you might not work for another person, and what works for them might not work for you. So the key takeaway messages are to be tailored, to take your own time and to work for you and your strengths and your preferences. So Autism NI have a range of different supports available, including our helpline, adult supports and adult resources. So please do feel free to get in contact and you can find out more information. All the information is in the description of the video. If you need further support for your mental health, you can also contact your local GP surgery.